Fall camp is finally here, and we have plenty of questions that need to be answered. Will this be Kyle Whittingham's last fall camp? Who's going to stand out in the backup quarterback battle? The wide receiver room has multiple guys that could emerge. There is so much to discuss on today's fully loaded Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcasts. If it's your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments, as well as on social media. We can follow our show on X at Locked On Utes. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our fantastic friends at FanDuel. You can make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports, they stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. You can visit FanDuel.com to get started. My name is JT Wistricll, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. On today's show, I'm decided to talk about fall camp. It's finally here. And in order to help me do that, it's friend of the show, KSL.com's Josh Furlong. And Josh, thank you so much for joining me. What I'm excited to talk about today is just all of our biggest questions that we have leading into fall camp. So mine right away, I've talked about a lot, is I want to figure out what the state of this offensive line will be. Kyle Whittingham at Media Day sounded very confident in his two tackles. Caleb Lohman, we haven't really seen yet in major action. So that was, I thought, a very interesting statement by him, but still some things to be determined. And I think things that could potentially hold this team back as you gear up to cover what could potentially be our final camp. Kyle, what are you most looking forward to?
To me, I mean, it's just getting back to football. I know that's the easy answer. But I think it's just coming back to that, being able to talk about football and not talk about kind of the hypotheticals on paper and, all that stuff that fills the summer breaks and everything. But, if you're looking at specific position groups, I mean, I think one of the most fascinating, especially on offense, if we'll stay with that, is the QB2 spot, right? I mean, obviously we know what Cam Rising can do. And from the spring game, he looked healthy. He looked great. Everything was going well. But the reality is, in this world, you have to have a good backup. And Utah found that out, that they didn't really have the sustainability behind Cam to really compete. So for me, it's really that's kind of the number one priority is being able to find out who is QB number two. And I understand that maybe isn't the highest priority for what the team is looking for, but they need to find somebody that's going to be able to take those secondary reps and be able to kind of learn from Cam and to be able to be in that system to help that. Beyond that, to me, it's probably wide receivers, right? I think trying to figure out some of those things and trying to say, who is going to step up. It's not so much a question of will they have production. It's more of, what's going to happen. So those are my two first initial looks on the offensive side of the ball, but I'm excited to see how it goes. I mean, this has the potential to be one of the best offenses in Kyle Whittingham's tenure. I mean, I don't want to quite go that far because there's been some good offenses, but I think this is probably the most well-rounded offense that Kyle Whittingham has put together.
I agree with that. The talent of this team on paper is tremendous. And because it's on paper in large parts, also because of what they've seen on the field. It's not like we're like, oh, this 4-star wide receiver can be great. Like Tayshawn Lyons, if he pans out, that's awesome. This wide receiver room, if he isn't ready this year to be one of the top 3 guys, they should still be fine. So we'll get to talk to the offensive players, defensive player this week, but we also get to talk to our assistant coaches. Normally, that's not very noteworthy, but this year, we finally get to talk to Morgan Scalley since he was officially named the head coach in waiting. Josh, what are you most looking forward to about finally hearing from Morgan about this process and timeline?
I mean, I think it's just more his thoughts on it, but for the most part, he's going to brush it aside. He's very similar to Kyle. Yeah, you're not going to get some earth-shattering quotes from him and saying, like, can't wait for Kyle to move along type thing. Morgan is very, very mindful of his position, right? If he were to be the defensive coordinator for the rest of his life, he would be 100% happy, right? This is not a guy that is trying to necessarily steal the job or trying to jump up the line. He's happy to be in Utah's system wherever you put him. Obviously, he's been successful and he's been able to do things in a way that gives the athletic department and Kyle and other people some optimism into who he can be. And so he'll take it, right? But at the same time, he's going to put his head down, he's going to work hard, and he's going to continue to do that. That's not going to change when or if he is the actual head coach. And so I don't expect a lot from him. He's going to be focusing in on the season. Look, he's not the head coach yet, so he's not going to worry about that. So, whether it's next year or years after that, he's not going to focus on being the head coach. He's going to focus on having the best defense that he possibly can have, and doing what he can to make sure that Utah's ready to go in roughly 30 days from when they officially start fall camp.
That is correct. I mean, at the time we're recording this, Utah is just barely over a month away from their first game. So the fact that we are getting that much closer to football being back is so exciting. And we get to hear from all the assistant coaches, which is really exciting because I had mentioned the offensive line. I'm curious to hear what Jim Harding discusses in that. I was already a little surprised that Caleb Lomu and Fano, like just being for sure. Fano, I knew would start in some capacity. Lomu, for sure, being the guy at left tackle with some other veterans that were in the mix to start a tackle last year was something that surprised me. But Kyle Whittingham wants to give those guys an early confidence boost. So that's another position I'm very curious about. But we can backtrack to the quarterback battle that you mentioned and I mentioned as well quickly. I think this is a very interesting battle and one that we have talked about a while for like year after year. We've talked about the backup quarterback battle, whether it was Bryson Barnes to Quindon Jackson last year, Bryson Barnes, Brandon Rose. Now we've landed at Brandon Rose versus Isaac Wilson, maybe Sam Heward. Very different guys. Rose doesn't have experience, but has by far the most experience with Utah's playbook, learning it and having it repped it out in practice so many times. Isaac Wilson, the 4-star, tremendously talented, turned it over a little too much early on in spring ball, but found his footing and looked great in the spring game. Then you get Sam Heward. He's played the most of these guys, but he just got to Utah. There's a reason it didn't work at Washington and he had to go to Cal Poly. So how is he going to fare back at the Power 5 level? I think there are a lot of, and there are other guys in that quarterback room too. So it's just a very intriguing room. And I do think that 3 of those guys all have a chance to be the backup.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions surrounding who that could be, but I think there's a lot of consistency there, right? I mean, with Sam, you've got a guy that has been in a system that understands how a Power 5 team works. He also understands what it's like to be able to take reps at a collegiate level, even if it is at a lower tiered school. He understands what that takes, and there's a lot of guys that jump from the FCS to FBS and make that jump and do well. So I don't know that there's worry there. It's more of the timeline of him coming in the summer and being able to understand the system. But at the same time, he's your backup, right? He doesn't have to have everything at his arsenal immediately, like you would if you had to rely on him as a starter. That would change things, I think, in my opinion. If this was last year and Cam wasn't healthy, that's going to change things. I still think he'd probably have the odds-on favorite to be that guy just because of his experience. But with that said, I mean, you do look at Brandon Rose and Isaac Wilson, right? To me, yes, Brandon has been in the system the longest. He understands the system better than anybody. He was starting to make progress. But the fact that Isaac Wilson is on even plane with him, according to Kyle Whittingham, and we kind of saw that at spring, kind of shows where Isaac is at versus where Brandon's at, right? Brandon's still not grasping it enough to be able to have Kyle say, look, Brandon is the guy right now. And I understand some of that's recruiting and you're trying to keep your guys intact and not go to the transfer portal. But Isaac wasn't necessarily a guy that was looking to, get an immediate start. He knew what system he was coming into. He knew where he was going to be. And the fact that he's right there with him kind of, to me, shares what the system is with Brandon. So I don't know. And I don't want to make, disparaging comments about Brandon and say he's number 3 on the depth chart. But I think that, to me, the real competition is going to come down to Sam or Isaac, right? You've got a guy that has experience. You've got a guy that understands how football is played versus an up and coming talent, which probably is the future. I think a lot of people project Isaac to be the future. Obviously, you see that he's a guy that isn't afraid to go for these big moments. He's going to hit those tight windows. It's more timing for him. But he's humble enough to recognize that he's not there yet, right? He understands where he needs to be. So, to me, I kind of view it as Sam and Isaac. Once again, that's not to say anything about Brandon, but I just think if he's competing at that same level with a freshman, I think that kind of shows where he's at in terms of the depth, just simply not being able to showcase it that much more in the fact that you have a guy that came in spring and was doing essentially the same thing.
Great point. I've said in the past that I think post spring, even though Isaac looked good, I thought it would be Brandon because he has the most experience with this playbook. We've heard a lot about how complicated it is to learn this playbook and the turnovers. But if Wilson solves the turnover issue, and like it's the end of spring, guys, the guy we get in fall camp, he's got the talent. He could absolutely be the backup there. And we know Heward has the talent too from being the former 5-star. So that race is far from over. And one thing that is just absolutely fascinating about this fall camp is we call it Camp Kyle sometimes too. You see that get dubbed by Utah football even themselves. This could be the final Camp Kyle if we look at some recent comments made by Kyle Whittingham, potentially. That's what I want to be discussing in one moment. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by Ibotta. Sandals, sunscreen, snacks for the kids. What do these have in common? You're probably buying a ton again this summer, but don't stress about the cost. Use Ibotta and get cash back on all your purchases when you stock up on all your summer essentials. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. You can earn on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That's right. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, that flight you've been eyeing, or the fancy dinner you've been craving. It's time you join the over 50 million users who use Ibotta to earn cash back every time they shop. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. That's all caps, no spaces. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONCollege. That's Ibotta in the Google Play or App Store and use that code LOCKEDONCollege, all caps, no spaces, to enjoy $5 off just for trying Ibotta. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at Factor. Warmer, sunnier days are calling. Fuel up for them with Factor's no prep, no mess meals. Meet your wellness goals in time for the summer thanks to the menu of chef-crafted meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Factor Fresh's never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy the nutritious, great tasting meals. You can make them so fast and easy. What are you waiting for? They have 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every week. You'll always find a new flavor to explore. You can treat yourself to restaurant quality meals that feature premium ingredients like fish, shrimp, and even salmon. You can keep kitchen time to a minimum. Factor meals are ready in 2 minutes. No shopping, prepping, cooking, or cleaning up. You can enjoy effortless support for your lifestyle. Choose from 6 menu preferences to help you manage calories, maximize protein intake, avoid meat, or simply eat a well-balanced meal. You can head to factormeals.com/lockedoncollege50 and use code lockedoncollege50, and that's lockedoncollege, no caps. So all lowercase and 50 with no spaces mixed in, all lowercase, Locked On College 50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That code Locked On College 50 at factormeals.com/Locked On College 50 to get 50% off of your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. Head over to Factor today and get in on the action. All right, Josh, let's keep it rolling. We're going to get to hear from Kyle Whittingham. Again, we got to hear from him at Big 12 Media Day. And it was very interesting because he did not say, like, hey, this is my final fall camp. But he did say, I'm probably not going to be here in 2027, talk about Utah's game against Miami. He goes on Jim Rome's show, says he's day to day, which I think was a very interesting answer there. And I know he was joking, but just Kyle doesn't seem like the type of guy who Kyle said he doesn't want to do like a Coach K type retirement, right? Where he's not going to go, this is my last dance, and then I'm going to walk away. Like he's just going to walk away when he decides that that's time. And there's been comments over the years, if he's talked about, hey, I'm not going to coach past 65. He's going to turn 65 here soon. And I understand things might change there because of the new contract he's got. But with Cam Rising and a lot of these veterans leaving after this year, he's been doing this for 20 years now. It's a lot of time. There's writing on the walls where this could be Kyle Whittingham's potential fall camp. But Josh, unfortunately, I don't think he's going to give us any hints at that when we do get to speak with him on Monday.
No, he's not, and I think he's tired of talking about that. I think he did that at Big 12 Media Day because he's expected to, especially with in light of Morgan's contract. But
Mhm.
um, by and large, I really do believe him when he says it's a day-to-day thing. I think when you see a lot of these coaches that have either been in a time for a long time or they've been coaching just forever, it really becomes a day-to-day process, right? Where when you wake up, especially at that age, not that he's like super old, but he wants to spend time with his grandchildren. He wants to be able to do those things. When you get to that point, do you wake up thinking that your job is a chore, or do you think that it is still something that you're passionate about? I still believe Kyle's passionate. Watching him, especially in spring, he was the most focused I think I've ever seen him in his tenure. Usually in spring, he's a little bit punchy, he has a lot of fun, and not that he doesn't do that, but he's much more loose. This spring, he was very much so business minded, wanted to focus, wanted to make sure everything was set. That doesn't speak to me as a guy that is ready to call it quits yet, right? And with that said, speaking as a day to day thing, I don't think he's just going to walk and leave midway through a season, right? He's
Yeah.
not that type of a guy. This is a guy that is honestly just going to make his decisions on a day to day basis as he goes through this schedule. Is it a chore? Is it something that he gears up for, or what's it going to be? So, I I don't know. I go back and forth on whether this will be his last year. I think it has the makings for a great send off, especially if Utah is the team that everybody projects them to be, right? But I could also see him wanting to go further on, right? Like I think there's something about football that he just can't get away from, and it's not something because he's trying to just hold on to things that aren't there. This is something that he could do for as long as he wants, and I think he still is improving. He's still getting better. He's finding ways to be able to adapt to an ever evolving college landscape. And so I don't think it's a bad thing for him. I think it's just a matter of kind of finding when the right time is for him. And it's honestly just going to be him when he wants to do it. It's not going to be for Morgan Scally. It's not going to be for anybody else. It's going to be for him. Right. And so I think that's the interesting thing there, where we might see him in 2027 when they play that Miami game. I don't think so, but I think we're getting closer to the end. But I honestly think that this is one of those things that we won't find out until the very end, and he'll just announce it in a press release or something like that, and he'll be on his day and head to Hawaii and go do what he wants to do out there.
You make a great point about how focused he was. Like that's fascinating to think about that he's that locked in. And you could look at that one way and go really focused on this year because he wants to make sure it can be the best it can and then walk away. But you could also make it as, hey, he wants to be great this year. And then after this year, he's not going to lack for motivating factors to come back, in my opinion. Like, sure, if you win the Big 12, go to the college football, like even if they win a game there, like that's incredible. But there could be people who say, like, well, can you do it again? And the thing we both know is true, Josh, is regardless of what happens this year for Utah, unless they land some quarterback in the transfer portal that you and I are just like, it knocks our socks off, we're surprised by, there's no way Utah is going to sit atop that Big 12 media preseason poll. Like Utah is not going to be picked to win the conference again with the amount of talented players they lose. Up towards the top, sure, but to me, they lose a lot. So there will be questions like, hey, you've experienced all this success, but the doubters will always find a way to say something negative, right? So that's where you could look and find your motivation. They could be like, oh, can you do it without Cam Rising? Well, Isaac Wilson's ceiling is higher than Cam Rising's. Like that's just a fact of when they were at this point in their recruiting era. So if Kyle believes in Isaac and still has that fire going, lots of reasons that he could still continue. And this just feels like a team too, Josh, that does have a very bright future, but some of these skill position, man, it's crazy to think how good they are under Kyle Whittingham. We talked a little bit about the state of the receiver room. I want to touch on that in a moment, but I'm also fascinated to watch the running back room and see how that shakes out because no, there's obviously not Zach Moss there. I really like Mekhi Bernard though. I love what Anthony Woods did at Idaho. Can he come up and step up? I believe so. Jalen Glover feels like for a while he's really wanting to be like the guy of this backfield. He's been kind of knocking on the door for a bit. And Mike Mitchell was one of the breakout guys in the first few spring practices. There's a lot of mouths to feed in that running back room. And you have a lot to also feed in that receiver and tight end room. Only so many guys are going to get the ball. So, Josh, I can't wait to see how these running backs separate themselves over the next few weeks. But first, I want to talk to you all a little bit more about our great friends at FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer and fewer games. And the sports, they're just not sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So you can head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. Yes, we still have to wait until college football and the NFL are back, but that doesn't mean you can't head over there now, bet on who's going to win the Super Bowl, who's making the college football playoff, if you think that's Utah or if you think that's someone else. And we still got all the great MLB action going on post All-Star break as we are inching closer and closer to the postseason for Major League Baseball. So make sure you guys head over to FanDuel today, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
Yeah, that's honestly one of the biggest questions that Kyle has for the offense. I asked him at media days, what's his biggest question, and he said, that the running back. And it wasn't necessarily that he worries about their depth. It's more about who's going to separate themselves, right? It's the depth and how it's going to shake out. Do they have a bell cow back, the Zach Moss type player that's going to come in here and get the bulk of the carries and kind of be the guy, the focal point of that offense in terms of the run game? Or is it going to continue to be kind of that running back by committee that it has been for the last few years? I mean, Tavion Thomas kind of started to separate himself before he had some off the field issues and even on the field issues. But there were some things that never really separated themselves to allow Utah to have that guy since Zach Moss. And so that'll be interesting. Anthony Woods, he's not going to be a factor simply because he's injured. He came in injured, and so he's not going to be there. So we'll have to wait to see there. But Mekhi Bernard, Jalen Glover, those are going to be two guys with veteran experience. But I have to point out that this isn't just one of those things where who is the best with the ball. It's one of those things where Quinton Ganther and Andy Ludwig, they want somebody that's the complete package. This isn't somebody that can just say, oh, he can hit the holes well and get 5 yards after tackle. This is a guy who comes in that has, the full game in terms of pass protection. He's a guy that has great vision. He can be a wide receiver, flex him out a little bit. They're trying to find a lot of that to make this complete back. And if any of those guys can be it, that's going to give them a leg up. Mekhi Bernard and Jalen Glover are going to be the guys that are probably the odds-on favorite just because of where they've been and the system they've gone through. And Mekhi Bernard has the best pass pro on the team, at least coming into this season. Jalen Glover was really picking up steam as the season picked up last year. But there's a lot of talk about Mike Mitchell, right? Like there's a lot of people that are really optimistic about him inside and outside of the system. And he's going to be a guy that has that potential. He's got the frame, the prototypical frame. The question is if he can put it all together and kind of do it. So it'll be a fascinating battle to see because I think there's a lot of ways that this could go. But I don't think Utah's in any worry. I think Utah's going to try to flex it out more with the wide receivers and try to pass the ball more. But I think a lot of that too will come dependent on how their run game is and kind of what they do, and they're going to be fine. It's just a matter of how they kind of divvy up those reps.
We'll be fine. And this is, like we kind of said earlier, like my biggest question about this team, like if someone were to say, hey, JT, why didn't Utah reach their goals? I would say the offensive line didn't do their part. That, as you said, there's also questions about who will be the guy in the running back room. But at the end of the day, we can also go back to this is a Kyle Whittingham, like a Morgan or an Andy Ludwig, Kyle Whittingham like team. They're going to run the ball. They're going to be physical. And even last year, yes, the players had some issues as well, but there was also like the offensive line did, but there was also the Bryson Barnes factor. There was the conservative play calling because they just simply didn't trust Bryson as much as they trust Cam. So a lot of things working against them last year that should be working more in their favor come this season. We mentioned running back, a lot of talented guys there. There also is in the secondary. I am fascinated to see who are going to be the guys here. Zamiah Vaughn obviously has a starting spot locked up back there. Keenan Johnson earned a lot of rave reviews in the spring. He should be out there. Smith Snowden looked fantastic in the bowl game. I expect those to be the top three cornerbacks that Utah employs. But the safety room, man, I feel good about these safeties, which is crazy because we lost Sione Vaki and Cole Bishop. Like, I'm not saying these guys are going to be those players, but like good, strong collegiate safeties. It feels like this room has four of them. Teo Johnson, the reviews the coaches have given him have been fantastic for a guy that was good last year, but I don't think that just shows you the progress and the strides he's made. Gilman transfers in from Stanford after having some success over there for his individual play. And I really liked what I saw from Nate Ritchie as well as Jonathan Hall in the bowl game. I mean, Northwestern scored 14 points. And I remember the one big pass play they made, like it was an incredible catch where like both of them nearly broke it up themselves too. So like I feel like this secondary has several quality players when it's led by Morgan Scalley and Sharif Shaw, we shouldn't be surprised, right, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, this is a position group that, for the most part, they continue to rebuild, right? The biggest questions there are more related to experience on the field versus just talent. Utah's going to find their guys, and they do a really good job of identifying them and being able to get them in a system that fits their strengths, right? That's not to say that they're going to be the best. They're not going to be, I'm blanking on names all of a sudden, but they're going to be these guys that are going to be established.
I don't know if there's a Clark Phillips back there, for example.
Yeah, I mean, even Cole Bishop, right? Like, I mean, you're going to have
Mhm.
these guys that are going to do well. I mean, they've done this for as long as they possibly can to be able to identify these guys, switching over to Julian Blackman to where he needs to be. So, there's guys that are able to be moved around. Like you said, there's 4 guys in that room, especially, that are going to be able to have their time. Each one of them have had specific time in the system, so it's not like they're coming in fresh and you're trying to expect freshmen to come in there and try to make some plays. These are guys that they haven't had those starting role, because you did have a Cole Bishop or Sione Vaki in there. They got their reps, right? In Utah, you're going to get your reps because they're going to try to move and shift these guys out and put them in different schemes. And so you're going to have guys that have played. So to me, Jonathan Hall, Nate Ritchie, Alakai Gilman, Teo Johnson especially, has come along really well and has moved over from wide receiver to the secondary and done a good job there. So they're going to be set. Coming into spring, I think Utah was a little hesitant. Morgan was a little hesitant on what they were going to look like. But when we got to the end of spring, he was adamant that they were in a much better position than they were, that they were really excited about what they had. And we'll see what that looks like on Monday when we get to talk to them. But I think they feel really optimistic about that. Barring injuries, I think they should be okay.
Speaking of Utah feeling more optimistic about something towards the end of the spring, people were already high on this receiver room. As soon as he landed Dorian Singer, Tayshawn Lyons was a nice luxury too. Like, you felt good. But I feel like there's going to be a breakout star of the early parts of fall camp. And I think his name is Damian Alford. I think this is a guy who's going to really turn some heads. And unfortunately, for anyone who's doesn't know this, the Utah media is not allowed to watch the practice. So like, you will have to wait till you hear from the reporter. So a lot of other fall camps, you'll see they can see a viewing. That's just not something that Utah does. So we won't be able to see Damian Alford making big plays, but I think he's going to. This is a guy who averaged 19 yards per catch at Syracuse, over 600 yards last year. This feels like the big play threat that this offense has lacked. And I know Money Parks can be that guy too, but I think the second best wide receiver on this team by the time they get to their first game will be Damian Alford.
Yeah, there hasn't been a lot of talk about him because I think Dorian Singer has taken a lot of that attention, right? And for good reason. You saw what he did in spring. You saw the connection that he and Cam had. I think there's good reason to believe that Dorian is going to be the guy, right? But like you mentioned, Dorian, these are all getting all confusing in me. I mean,
we're 24 minutes into it. And I should mention as well that Damian didn't arrive until after spring ball. So that's why we didn't see headlines about him.
Yeah, so he comes into the system already a little behind in that regard, but this isn't something that he's going to be behind. He understands how to play. Like you said, he was at Syracuse. He understands the system. If anything, he's in a better system right now for him. I understand that sounds kind of crazy considering that Utah hasn't always been a pass first type team, but he comes into a more consistent system that if he can make the plays, Andy Ludwig is going to scheme toward him, right? This isn't one of those things that Dorian is the guy and we have to give it to him every single time. They're going to find ways to be able to get there. Little fun fact, Brant Keithy still exists on the team and he's going to get there. You have Landon King on the team that's going to be there. You've got a lot of these guys that are going to demand reps. And so he's got to come in there and put his best foot forward, and we've got to be able to see what that is. I think he can. The fact that you said he had like 600 yards at Syracuse shows that he can do it. It's just a matter of being able to do it in Utah's system, doing that against all these other teams. But by and large, this has to be one of the best wide receiver corps that Utah's ever had. Mix that with the tight end room. You get all those guys in there. This has the potential to be an unlimited room of weapons, right? Now, that's easy to say on paper. It's easy to come in here and say, oh, Utah has this and this and this and this, and they do, but it's another to be able to put it out on the field. sometimes you have so many weapons, so many mouths to feed that you forget about it, right? You've got a Micah Pittman who people aren't going to remember him really either.
We didn't talk about him yet.
No, and so you've got somebody like him, he's bought into the culture. He wants to get in there. Dejan Zipperer, he had a great spring and was doing really well. You've got a lot of these guys that are kind of making their progress and making their names known, but they still might be the 6th, 7th best option. So this will be a fun this year will be probably the funnest year to see that development. It could either be an incredible opportunity for Cam Rising, or it could just be another thing that people are going to complain about because wide receivers aren't used the same. It's probably both, honestly. But I think the options are, limitless with this team, just simply because of the depth and the talent that they have in that room for the first time in a long time.
You're absolutely right. And it's a group that I feel like could be special. Even when we're just talking about the passing game, like the running back room is unknown, but on third downs, we know Mekhi Bernard's going to be out there because of, like you said, he does as a pass protector, but he's good as a receiving option too. I can remember those USC games, him making big catches out of the backfield. So that's just an added luxury for this team. Also, not to take shots over 25 minutes in this podcast, but you mentioned that Damian Alford is in a better situation now than he was at Syracuse. Well, he was going to have Kyle McCord throwing him the ball. So I think that is absolutely the case now that he gets to team with Cam Rising.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little different to have Cam Rising throwing the ball, but we'll see. We'll see. It's easy to say all this on paper, but I think it's going to be a fun system.
It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a fun season. And Josh, there is a lot to cover and try to keep track of with this Utah football team. If people want to try to keep everything straight, where should they head over to?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at j4ksl. I post a lot of the updates there. And then obviously you can read me on ksl.com where I publish my work as well as the podcast that I do. So you can check it out there. I try to give you in many different avenues all the updates on Utah football.
Josh, great stuff. Thanks again for joining me.
Appreciate it, man.
That is going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. Fall camp is here. We'll be reacting to all of the comments made by the coaches and players on tomorrow's show. Football is back, and we can't wait to continue to cover Utah football on Locked On Utes.